Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar, Setting Up a New Medical Practice During COVID-19. My name is Kate and I will be moderating our session today. We will wait a few minutes before we start the actual presentation to give others time to join. Meanwhile, I'll go over the house rules. You can download the presentation for this webinar from the right side of your screen. We will also be sharing a recording of the session with you within the next 48 hours. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so please send in all your questions by using the comment section below. In case we are unable to take all your questions today, we will make sure that we email replies to you as soon as possible. Our panelists today are Marianne Lambert from Software Finder and Mr. Crawford Ifland, founder and CEO of Messenger Healthcare Marketing, a leading healthcare practice marketing company in the US. Marianne has over 10 plus years of health IT consulting and vendor assessment experience under her belt. She is your go-to person for understanding healthcare reform and technology pitfalls, while Mr. Ifland has over 12 years experience creating marketing strategies for healthcare providers and organizations. Clients range from single physician offices to multi-physician practices and hospitals. Thank you, Crawford and Marianne, for joining us today. I am now going to forward the controls over to the speaker. It's all yours, Marianne.
Thank you so much, Kate, for the brief introduction. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for taking out time on your busy Tuesday afternoon to be a part of this presentation. I'm going to try my best in order to make it worthwhile in the limited time that I've been given. In case you guys have detailed questions about the subject matter that we'll be engaging with today, you guys will receive certain recommended resources by the end of this presentation that you can use in order to explore the subject matter further. You can also send us queries in through the contact information that we'll be sharing by the end of the presentation. Before I start, I'm just putting a disclaimer out there that the information that we're going to be sharing with you today is just a guideline and should not be used as a substitute for legal or financial advice. Moving on, we have divided today's presentation into three particular sections, whereby in the first two sections, I will be talking about the basic business components and strategies for success for any organization. We will also be sharing a checklist with timelines, rough timelines that you require for opening up a new practice. We will primarily be giving you things that you need to do prior to 6 months of opening up your practice. You can then go ahead and choose what works for you depending on your current situation. We will then be joined by Mr. Crawford Ifland to explain to you some of the key marketing concepts and how to implement them in order to start getting more patients in your practice. Finally, we will have a brief Q&A session where we will try to answer as many questions as possible. So let's start. The first and foremost thing to understand is when you're thinking of opening up a medical practice, you have to think of a life which is much beyond being a medical provider only. You have to think like an entrepreneur. A lot of times, at first glance, opening up a practice might seem pretty straightforward. You need to get the money, you have to find a location, register your business, inform insurances, hire staff, open house, wait for the referrals to roll in, see patients, and get paid. However, if there's anything that we've learned in 2020 and this pandemic, is that things hardly go our way. So in real life, this is what opening up a new medical practice might look like. There might be a lot of confusion. Everything and anything that can go wrong may go wrong. So the important thing that we need to do is that we need to consider the fact that life can happen and we need to plan for it and be prepared for side steps and setbacks. So how do you prepare for it? The first and foremost thing that any business, whether it's a medical practice or a garments factory, need to consider is to set up a business plan for starting up your business. Now, a business plan is important. However, the surprising thing is that most of the businesses, including medical practices, when they're thinking of opening up, they hardly take out the time to plan a cohesive business arrangement or a business plan that's going to guide them. That is one of the reasons why 80% of medical practices, new medical practices, and these are real statistics, tend to fail in the first 1 to 2 years of opening up, while 100% of them thought that they're going to be successful. So even though it's good to be confident, it's always better to do your homework and to be prepared for everything that can happen. Now, a business plan is important primarily for 3 reasons. The first and foremost reason is that it indicates your seriousness to yourself, to your shareholders, to the funding agencies, as well as investors, that you're serious about doing your business. 2, you will require a business plan in order to create a pro forma that the banks will require when you basically submit an application in order to get funding, in order to get a line of credit. So you require a business plan from the let-go. And the third reason is that it's going to outline all the strategic goals and finances that you will require in order to build a successful business. So moving on, a business plan does not have to be, one shoe fits all. You can find numerous templates online that you can go ahead and utilize. And the most important thing that you need to remember is that it needs to reflect that you have done your due diligence in researching and planning your business. So what I'm going to share with you today are some of the key components that should be a part of your business plan. We will then go over some of the things that you need to include this business plan in order to make it a successful one and to ensure that your investors, even your human resource, understand that you're serious about your business and the chances of succeeding in this business are going to be higher. The first and foremost thing is the executive summary. Now, like the first paragraph of a good novel, it needs to catch the eye of the reader. So you don't want it to be long, you don't want it to be boring, you want to keep it short, you need to keep it memorable, but most importantly, you need to share all the important details, such as what is the location going to be like? What are the number of providers that are going to be there? What are the specialties that you guys are going to cover? And first and foremost, what is the competitive advantage that you're going to have in comparison to all the other practices that might exist in your area? The second thing that you need to add in your business plan is a company overview. Now, for existing practices that are looking to open a new location, or for somebody who's already done this before, it can be a brief history of your company, of your practice. It can be about what are some of the things that you've done, the legal entity that you are. But for a person who's opening a practice for the first time, or for a new doctor, this will have to focus on what your qualifications are and what are some of the accomplishments that you've had. The idea is that you want to increase the confidence that an investor or a sponsor is going to have as far as your company is concerned, because they're going to put their money in this particular organization and they need to know that their money is going to be safe. So keep that in mind when you're building a company analysis. The third portion of a business plan is an industry analysis. In your scenario, it basically talks about how many doctors and medical providers are in the region and how many of them are in the specialty that you practice. A second thing that you can talk about is, for example, what is the market like for solo practices or smaller practices? Are they shrinking? Are there more? Are there other opportunities available for them? You might also want to engage with where the environment is going. For example, nowadays it's COVID-19, which means that it definitely is going to have an impact as far as how you plan your business. What are some of the funding things that you keep in mind, whether it is a good idea at the end of the day to open a solo practice, or whether it would be, better to go for a hospital-owned practice, considering the environment that we exist in today. Similarly, you might want to talk about the telemedicine aspect of, servicing your patients. So all of these things, all of these trends that you see in your particular sector are things that you need to cover in your industry analysis. The next thing is a customer analysis. Now, this is something that most people don't do. it is important because at the end of the day, your patient volume and your patient satisfaction will depend on how much you understand them. So you need to put in the demographics of your target population. Are you going to be dealing with young people? Are you going to be dealing with old people? Would telemedicine would at the end of the day be a good fit for you if most of the patients that you're dealing with are going to be 65 and above? So those are some of the things that you need to cover in your customer analysis. And you need to clearly outline what is it that you're going to do which is going to appeal to this particular demographic. Just saying that you're a good medical provider or you're good at your job is not going to cut it, especially if you're trying to get investors on board. So be very clear on what you have to offer as a new practice that maybe your competitors don't. Which brings us to another important part of your business plan, which is the competitive analysis. Now, you need to talk about the direct competitors, which could be other doctors in your area that do the same thing, or other practices in your area that do the same thing. You need to consider the indirect competitors. These are organizations that provide care. For example, if somebody comes to you with back pain, they might be going to a spa or they might be going to an acupuncturist's office before coming to you. So those are all direct competitors. In your competitive analysis, you need to cover what is it that makes them special. Do they have a first mover's advantage that you don't? And then you need to outline what is it that you're going to do in order to combat the competitive advantage that these people are going to have. Think about it. And it's also important for you when it comes to credentialing, for example. So one of the things that we always recommend when somebody is thinking about credentialing their practice is to have a better understanding of the plans that surgical centers, hospitals, other practices near you, for example, are using. And you should put that in your competitor analysis. Because at the end of the day, if you're the only provider who's not in network with these particular plans, then there's a high probability that the patients in that area would rather prefer to go to those practices than yours because you're going to be relatively expensive. So that is some of the key details that you should be thinking about when you're doing your competitor analysis. The next thing is to look at the marketing plan. This is something that Crawford will be talking to you in detail. So I'm not really going to go into much detail here, but the simple thing is you need to understand what the product is, what are some of the services that you're offering, are you selling something to the audience. For example, if you're in optometry practice, you might have glasses, lens, etc. that you're selling. So all of those things need to be pointed out here. What is the pricing going to be like? What are the average pricing in the area that you guys have had? What are the insurances plan offering you? So all of that information needs to be a part of your marketing plan. Moving forward, the operations plan is equally important. Now, the key operational process is basically the day-to-day account of how you would run your office, what staff you're going to hire, what is a day in your office going to look like, how are the patients going to come in, how are they going to be treated, is there going to be sort of assessment before you get new patients. All of those things need to be outlined in the operational plan. As part of the operational plan, the second thing that you need to do is also have mitigating circumstances. So what are some of the risks, etc., that your practice is going to face? What are some of the things that you're going to do about it? Moving forward, the most important thing and the final thing that you're going to have is the financial plan. What is your revenue model? For most practices, this is going to be fee for service. Are you going to think about opening up a concierge practice? So you need to highlight where the revenue for your practice is going to come from. The financial highlights, what are the expenses going to be like? What is the debt situation as far as you're concerned? And also, what is the expected revenue, at least for the first 1 to 3 years before your revenue kicks in? All of this information needs to be a part of the financial plan. The most important thing is, again, the funding requirements. What is the money that you require in order to open the practice? Even though this may vary between one practice to the other, a lot of consultants believe that a rough estimate would be you might require $100,000 for buying equipment and basic startup cost. Apart from that, you might also require $100,000 as line of credit for payroll processing and basic working capital that you're going to require. Now, if you have the money with you, that's great. But if you don't, then you will need to find some sort of loans or financial backing as far as this is concerned. Now, we're going to be doing webinars in the future that's going to cover this particular topic, but I'm just going to share a few tips here as far as funding is concerned. So to get the funding, you need to create a pro forma, either yourself or by getting an accountant on board. A pro forma is really a synthesized version of your business plan. And when you're creating it, some of the tips that you should remember is A, do not submit the pro forma only to one bank. So find at least 5 to 10 different banks that you want to submit it to, which will increase your chances of getting better terms from these banks as compared to just submitting it to one or two. The second thing is whether you'll be able to get funding really depends on your credit worthiness. And if you're a new provider, you might have a lot of medical school loans, which is going to have a negative impact on that. But there's certain banks, such as the Bank of America and Wells Fargo, that have specific medical practice loans. So I would really advise you to reach out to them and to ask them what are those medical practice loans, because they have been devised for your particular scenario only, and they're better terms as compared to a normal small business loan. So reach out to them and try to see if that is something that you can secure for yourself. Another thing to remember is while you're building your pro forma or your financials, be conservative. Now, bankers have an eye for your BS. They understand if the numbers that you're providing them are inflated. So when you're talking about your expenses, your revenue projections for the next 3 years, as well as the debt scenario for your practice, make sure that you are giving conservative figures and then try to stick to those conservative figures. So if you need to buy furniture, it doesn't have to be plush leather furniture for your first practice. So keep all of those things in mind, because they will increase your chances in order to get better turnaround from the organizations. And plan that this process of securing funding might take some time. So it can take between 1 to 3 months, depending on how quickly you're able to reach an arrangement for the bank. So make sure that you give yourself enough time before opening your practice so that you are able to secure good funding. The final part of your business plan is the supporting documentation. I've discussed a lot of things that you need to do. And once we go over the checklist of the things that you need to do, you will have a better understanding of what supporting documentations you need to have. Now, when it comes to the checklist, what we've done is that we have included all the 59 steps that you need to do 6 months prior to opening up your practice. I'm not going to go into a lot of details about everything. We are going to share resources about some of these things that you can engage with. And remember that these the time frames might change depending on your current circumstances. But when it comes to 6 months before opening your practice, the first thing you need to do is get all your paperwork in order. You need to obtain the state medical license. If you're going to do telemedicine as well, make sure that you're licensed in all states where you intend to see your patients. You have to select an attorney, an accountant. You need to determine your practice entity. You need to choose an appropriate practice name, develop a logo, determine your financial resources available, what are the resources you have, what is the funding that you require, how do you intend to require it. You might want to develop a budget and come up with the cash flow projections. If you have an accountant on board, that would really, really help you to get this sorted. And the last thing you need to do 6 months before is to determine an appropriate physician compensation. The next thing that you need to accomplish 5 months before opening up your practice is to apply for federal employer identity, apply for state unemployment and income tax numbers, determine what your practice location is going to be. Now, these things are important because you really cannot start the credentialing process before all of this information is in place. You need to come up with a loan proposal, which is the pro forma that we're talking about, open up a bank account, decide on lab complexity, finalize and layout of your practice, determine site or office improvements that you need. Is it going to be a new office that you're building? Are you going to improve on an existing building? All of those things need to be sorted out at least 5 months prior to opening up. Some of the other things that you need to do: ideally negotiate the leasehold agreement, reserve office phone and fax numbers, obtain your NPI numbers, and then start the enrollment in commercial with government payers. Now, credentialing and contracting with insurances is one of the most important things that you will be required to do. And even though we're not going to go in a lot of details here, some of the things that you need to remember: it takes around about 3 to 6 months in order to get all in order to get all this work sorted. Some payers allow you to do this online, while with others you need to engage on paper. So make sure that you have enough time in order to get this sorted. One thing to remember here is have your paperwork in order. You will require maybe your CV, you will require, your bank account details, your licenses. All of this information should be in place before you start the credentialing process. Another thing to remember as far as credentialing is concerned, another thing to remember where this is concerned is that you might want to outsource it to a third entity. The problem with that is that it might be expensive. There are a lot of people who will help you do this, and it generally costs around $3,000. So doing it on your own or hiring a biller early on that has an understanding of these particular plans would be a good thing for you. The next thing: get proper insurance coverage. You require business liability, malpractice, workers' compensation, disability, and life insurances in place. You will also need to compile a list of in-house lab tests. What are the ones that you're going to be doing in-house? What are the ones that you need to register with as far as your other labs are concerned? Then acquire a telephone system. Some other things that you need to think about within the 4-month plan, I'm not going to go into a lot of details as we're running out of time, is to think about the technology as well as the supplies that you require. What is the equipment that you need to purchase? Do you need lab coats? Do you require an EMR system? Do you require a medical billing software? What are the communication tools that you're going to be using? All of these things you need to start thinking about them 4 months in advance, because it might take 1 or 2 months to secure a system that you really like. 3 months before opening your practice, you need to start thinking about hiring new resources as well as marketing your practice. So it looks like putting ads out there, conducting interviews, determining the fee schedule, ordering stationaries, ordering your CPT and ICD-10 coding books, coming up with a patient intake form, patient education material. All of those things should be developed on the 3rd month. In the 2nd month, you might want to meet up with potential referral sources, develop employee job descriptions, develop patient information, make sure that you are in compliance with all bodies such as HIPAA, OSHA, CLIA. So make sure you have compliance plans in place. And 1 month before that, make sure that you've hired your front end staff, your back office staff, you have assembled patient registration packets, you have a collection agency in place, a medical billing service in place, a janitorial and laundry and security service in place. And finally, 2 weeks before you open up, you should start accepting appointments, and you should start training your staff. Now, I haven't been able to go into a lot of details, but we're going to be doing future webinars on credentialing as well as funding for your practice, so you guys can get more information there. Finally, the sponsor that we have today is also offering a 3% the 3% charge for people who want to outsource their RCM services, as well as if they want to do their credentialing to this billing docs, which is our sponsor today. You guys may want to reach out to them and see if this is something that you want to do. Now, without any further delay, I'm going to hand over the controls to Crawford to really talk about how to get the patients rolling in. Over to you, Crawford.
All right, well, thank you, Marianne and Kate and the entire Software Finder team for having me be a part of this today. Let me just pull up my screen here and we can get going. So, marketing your practice. As Marianne mentioned, I am Crawford Ifland, and I am the CEO and founder of Messenger Healthcare Marketing. And a little bit about us. So, we were founded in 2012, and we focus exclusively on digital strategies for healthcare providers. So we really aim to be a one-stop shop for private practices to acquire more patients. So the way we operate, we have a distributed team of experts in their respective fields. So from SEO to paid advertising campaigns, brand identity design, and much, much more. We have people who can help in pretty much every arena of marketing your practice. And if a practice is looking for something that we might not do, we do have a vast network of contractors and freelancers, so we can definitely connect you with somebody who does. Our agency is a certified Google partner, so all of our experts have passed Google product certification exams and are up to date on the latest knowledge. And healthcare marketing is all we do and all we focus on. So you want to set up a new practice. Where do you begin? Well, as Marianne mentioned, there are many considerations to take into account as you get started on this journey. Things like developing a business plan, negotiating leases for office space, staffing your practice. Who do you need and how much are you going to pay them? You also have to think through things like funding and credit considerations, partnerships with banks, getting the right financing for your new practice. And of course, that's not to mention the pandemic that we all find ourselves in right now. But unless patients actually show up, it's all for naught. Patients are the lifeblood of your practice, because without a steady flow of patients coming through the door each and every month, you're not going to be in business for long. And because of that, getting patients is the biggest challenge facing every new practice. And with that goes some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that that challenge never really goes away. If you want your practice to grow, you need that consistent pipeline of patient leads coming in the door every month. But the good news is that there are high ROI strategies out there that can deliver new patients to your practice. And the challenge is finding the right mix for your practice and getting your marketing channels on autopilot. And that's what we're going to look at a little bit today. But first, let's start off by looking at where we are and some of the challenges that COVID-19 has presented to the healthcare community. Now, there are many challenges facing both new and established practices alike. This spring, we saw lots of mandatory government shutdowns and pauses in elective surgeries in particular. And some states are shutting down again as we see numbers rise. There have been ebbs and flows of case numbers, and it's very dependent on where you live and where your practice is located. If you're in New York right now, you've probably, fingers crossed, already seen the worst of it. But if you're in another place like Florida or Texas, it's a very different story. And that's not to mention business challenges. We've seen lots of practices furlough or lay off their staff entirely. Lots of tightening of credit and contraction of revenue as practices have had to pause their operations. And when you do open, there are new operating procedures all around. Things like mandatory face masks, social distancing within the practice. Lots of practices are shifting to telemedicine for screenings before a patient ever comes in. And it's because of this that there's really never been a more challenging time to be in medicine. I mean, I've talked to many doctors who have been in business for over 30 years, and they've said this pandemic is the hardest thing that they've ever experienced. But as a new practice, there's never been a better opportunity to set your brand apart. COVID, in many ways, is leveling the playing field for new practices. Some legacy practices have taken COVID as an impetus to wind down their operations entirely. And others are exiting the advertising market for the time being to kind of save their revenue. Now, I don't want to come off as if I'm celebrating any of these things. Obviously, it's a very hard situation for many people around the country and around the world. But those factors are an opportunity for new practices like yours to establish your brand and set yourself apart. So let's talk about branding for a minute. And first, we'll start off with the question, what is a brand? Now, when you try to answer this question, there are lots of misconceptions out there. Probably the one we hear most often is, oh, your brand is just your logo. Well, that's not true. Your logo is part of your brand, but it's just one of many parts. In reality, your brand is what your patients say it is. Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos has been quoted as saying, your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. And at Messenger, we like to define a brand as the sum of all touch points that patients have with your organization. So this could include pretty obvious things like your website, things like your search presence on Google. Are you showing up on page 1 or are you on page 10? This includes your advertising campaigns, social media and other marketing channels, as well as some intangible things that you might not have thought about before. Things like what your office space and your waiting room look like. How does your staff answer the phone when a patient calls? Does a patient have to go through a phone tree of, press 9 for this and press 2 for this? Or does a real human being pick up on the first ring? As an aside, we actually have one of our clients who moved all of their phones and office operations to the physical rear of their practice. So if you were in their waiting room, you'll never hear a phone ring. It was super important to them to think through all of the different ways that patients can interact with their practice, take a really holistic view there. And if you want to elevate your brand and attract new patients, it's all about presenting a coherent story across all of those touch points, even the ones that you might not be thinking about. Now today, we'll be looking at primarily the digital touch points, and it all starts with your website. As a physician, your website is the foundation of all of your digital marketing efforts. Nearly every patient that you interact with in person or maybe via telehealth these days, they're going to interact with your website at some point. And if you fail to deliver an exceptional experience online, that translates into poor patient perceptions of value. So if you want to attract new patients to your brand new practice, you really need to wow them with your website. Now, there's been a big focus on patient experience in recent years, and rightly so. And a core belief that we hold at Messenger is that patient experience doesn't start at the door of your office. Oftentimes, it starts online, well before patients ever meet you face to face. So you need to do all of that work to get off on the right foot and make a great first impression. So to do that, you need to focus on the fundamentals and keep patient experience at the heart of everything you do. Your website doesn't have to be terribly flashy, but it does need to provide a good experience. So how can you make your practice website the best it can be? Well, first of all, your website has to be responsive. And a responsive website is one whose content rearranges itself to show well on devices with smaller screen sizes. On a desktop, a block of text and a photo might appear side by side, but if you take that website and look at it on a mobile device like an iPhone, that photo will move beneath the block of text because that screen is so narrow. So if you're looking at a responsive website, there's no small text. You don't need to pinch to zoom just to read the things. You're usually not going to see a full navigation menu. Instead, you'll see an icon to open up a menu and conserve that real estate on your screen. And it's important to note that this is just one website. It's not a separate mobile website. So everything operates under one roof. Now, responsive design is important because of patient expectations and mobile internet use. In 2017, mobile traffic was 52% of all traffic on the internet, and that number is only rising as the years go on. Now, they say you never get a second chance to make a first impression, and that's really true online because it only takes 5/100ths of a second for our brains to process information and form an opinion about what we're seeing. And if that opinion is negative, you're really not doing yourself any favors. Just take a look at these stats. Nearly 3 out of 5 patients won't recommend a business with a poorly designed mobile site. 85% of patients think that a company's website, when viewed on a mobile device, should be as good as, if not better than, its desktop website. And almost 9 out of 10 patients are less likely to return to a site after they've had a bad experience. So you need to make sure that it works well on all devices. Your website also has to be fast. Half of patients expect a maximum of 2 seconds of loading time for an average website. And 4 out of 5 patients, 80%, expect the entire website to load in under 4 seconds. Now, it's difficult to balance website functionality with speed. The temptation, especially for doctors, is always to add more, but it's important to remain fast as you do so. And that's especially important, again, for mobile devices. If you're at home on your Wi-Fi, chances are you have a fast connection. But what if you're out on your phone and you're connected to a cell tower and you don't have that great service? The website isn't going to load as quickly, but the patient expectations remain the same. So you really need to deliver. And speed is crucial for Google too, which we'll get into in a little bit. And the final thing I want to mention, or the question I want to ask with a website, is should you blog as a doctor? Now, our default answer at Messenger is a resounding yes. You should blog and have a content marketing strategy in place. And the reason is for SEO, and that brings us to our next strategy for patient growth. Now, there are a lot of myths and misconceptions about what SEO is. But put simply, it's just the process of optimizing your website to appear higher in search engine results. You want to put your best foot forward to Google and other search engines so that they can discover your content, interact with your website, and then when a patient is doing a search, rank you higher. Why does SEO matter? Well, the following 2 statistics are really important. In 2020, 8 out of 10 patients turned to Google as their very first step in researching healthcare, whether it's a health condition, a procedure, or choosing a new doctor. And fewer than 1 in 100 patients ever clicks through to page 2 of Google or beyond. So if you're not on page 1, that means missed opportunities and missed revenue. And as a practice that's new to the market, you can't afford any unforced errors. So SEO is incredibly important. But then the question becomes, how can you deliver a good experience? So let's take a look at what Google really wants. And there are 3 things that Google is looking for on your website. The first thing is really good on-page experience. Google and other search engines want to see efficient code with no errors. They want to see a website that looks great on mobile devices, is easy to navigate, and one that loads quickly. We've kind of gone over all of those patient experience factors. But they also want to see great content. In general, your content through blogging and other content marketing needs to be informative for the patient. You have to answer patient questions and really fit the search intent of their query in order to rank highly. It also has to be in-depth and educational. Google doesn't rank thin content anymore. So if you think you're going to get by just churning out a bunch of blog posts that are 150 words and just spamming the internet with those, that doesn't work anymore. Your content needs to answer the patient's questions adequately. And it also has to be easy for Google to index. And that plays into the good on-page experience we just talked about. The third thing Google's really looking for is your good reputation around the web. So do an audit of what people are saying about you. What are patients saying about you in your reviews? What do third-party sites say? What kind of mentions are you getting around the internet? And can Google and other search engines really trust you? And this plays into 2 factors, EAT and YMYL. EAT is a major factor in Google's algorithm these days, and it stands for expertise, authoritativeness, and trust. If you want to rank highly, Google actually has to know that you're an expert, that you're authoritative on the topic you're writing about, and that what you say is trustworthy. And that's because of this second acronym, YMYL. Healthcare is solidly in the YMYL space, and it stands for your money or your life. So YMYL topics are those that if the information is presented incorrectly or inadequately, it could have an outsized negative impact on a person's health, well-being, or financial stability. So because healthcare is in this sensitive space, Google is going to hold you to a higher standard because of the importance of the topic. They want to know that you're actually an expert in your field and that the advice that you're giving and the content that you're creating is not only answering patients' questions, but is doing so in a way that's helpful and is not going to harm anyone down the road. So let's take a look at how SEO works. So as a doctor, you create content and put it on your website. This could be information about the services you offer, blog posts, maybe podcast episodes or frequently asked questions. And then Google comes in and crawls your website, finds that new content that you've written, and indexes it away for future use. Then someday a patient comes along and does a search, and hopefully Google surfaces your website as the most relevant result for that patient's query. SEO is all about giving patients and Google what they want to see and doing that legwork to get rewarded for those high rankings. Now, those three elements of SEO, a little bit of what we just talked about. There are the on-page factors like your website's design, code, loading time, mobile friendliness, things like that. There are also your off-page factors, which include backlinks back to your website and mentions of your brand around the internet. And then those other factors, EAT, the reputation of your brand, etc. Google analyzes all of these elements and its algorithms find the right place for your content to rank based on those factors. So SEO sounds pretty wonderful. There are definitely pros, but there are some cons too. So we'll get into those here. Pros, SEO is by far the best way to build authority in your space and in your market. And once you've earned rankings, it's really hard for competitors to knock you off that #1 spot. It's not very likely that competition can open up shop down the street and instantly be on page 1. They've got a long road ahead of them. And because of that, SEO really gives a long-term strategic advantage. So it's very beneficial to practices who engage in SEO campaigns. But there are some cons too. SEO is definitely a long-term strategy. There are no silver bullets to overnight rankings. And SEO requires investments as well. There's no 4 easy payments of $19.99 to be found here. Most fully managed SEO campaigns are going to run at least $1,000 a month, if not more, depending on the size of your website, the content that you're writing, how competitive your market is, and a number of other factors. And it's really hard to do SEO in-house. So Google makes 3,000 algorithm changes per year, and it takes a few hundred hours just to get certified and learn the tools to actually analyze the results that you're seeing. So if you don't live, eat, and breathe SEO, you're not very likely to get a payoff. And when you look at SEO, it's really important to take the long road because it does take time, but it can deliver really fantastic results. So let's take a look at a case study. This is a client of ours who's a plastic surgeon in a market of about 7.5 million people. Their previous SEO provider wasn't implementing changes in a timely manner. Their website actually got hacked during the process, and they had lots of on-page red flags. Their reputation was just a mess. They weren't seeing results in their SEO, even though their surgeon had been in business for over 25 years, their rankings were dropping each and every month. So we performed an audit of their website and their reputation around the internet, addressed on-page issues to improve online patient experience, and in the process, we actually ended up redesigning their website to fix some of the issues. And we began building links to help Google recognize the authority that they brought to the table. And as a result, we saw 12 keywords come onto page 1 when they didn't have any previously before we started working. In just 9 months, we saw 127% improvement in rankings, and overall that has translated into a 32% increase in monthly leads. So SEO has been a really great strategy for them, but it's just one strategy that you can use to actually get more patients to your practice. So next, we'll turn our attention to another, which is pay-per-click advertising campaigns. Now, the problem for many new practices in particular is that you need leads right away, but SEO, as we mentioned, takes a long time. And that's where PPC comes in, because it can offer immediate leads. So we'll take a look at how PPC works. And just as a side note, I'll use Google as an example when I'm talking about PPC, because Google is by far the largest advertising platform out there. But pretty much all of the major ad platforms work the same way. So if you hear me say Google, the same applies to DuckDuckGo and Bing and other search engines ad platforms. So a patient performs a search on Google. They type in maybe something like LASIK surgeon near me. Google looks through its index of advertisers who have bid on that keyword and said, hey, when somebody types this in, I want to appear. They run an auction to determine whose ad shows up first above those organic results that come as a result of SEO. And then a patient clicks on an ad. So they click on an ad and visit that website. Now, paid ads receive 41% of clicks on Google, and the majority of patients click on the very first thing that they see that answers their question or matches that search intent, regardless of whether it's an ad or not. And it's at this point that the advertiser is actually charged. That's why it's called pay per click. So on the website, let's assume that a patient fills out a form or submits some kind of offer to become a lead. This is called a conversion. And over time, that advertiser will receive aggregate data on how much it costs to acquire a new lead from their advertising efforts. Over time, they can reinvest profits back into PPC in the form of higher bids and higher budgets. That leads to more leads, and you can get that practice flywheel spinning, so to speak. The great thing about PPC is that once you've found a profitable formula with your campaigns and your ads and your keywords, it's practically infinitely scalable. So we've worked with some practices who got that flywheel spinning and have been spending upwards of $500 a day on ads because they're attracting leads on a massive scale. So PPC is a really great place to start. But again, there are pros and cons. The pros, it's data driven. It's super easy to demonstrate ROI. And with Google in particular, there are lots of opportunities to leverage big data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to enhance those opportunities to get new leads. That data-driven approach lets you have smarter marketing decisions. In the old days, it used to be, hey, we're going to spend a few $1,000s on a campaign, and we won't have any results for 30 or 60 days. And even when the results do come back, we don't really know how it worked. These days, thanks to A/B testing of different ads and different campaigns, you can run tests to see which ones perform best and make changes on the fly. So you won't waste as much marketing spent there. But there are cons of pay-per-click campaigns. You do have to fill that pipeline with money every single month, or else your results are going to dry up, because as soon as you stop paying, those leads aren't coming through the door. Now, budgets depend on various different factors, but for most new practices to really see results, it takes about $1,500 a month at least in ad spend to really move the needle. Personally, I'm not going to recommend to any client spending less than $1,000, because at that point on a monthly basis, the insights you're getting aren't really statistically significant. And once you've spent it, you've spent it. If your campaigns aren't structured properly, you could be throwing money down the drain. And that's why it's really important to have clear goals and good management in place to get the most from your ad spend. But despite these cons, PPC remains the #1 best place for new practices in particular to start, because the ROI can be very positive and it can happen right away. So as we wrap up here, I'll show just a brief PPC case study. And this is of a LASIK surgeon in a market of around 500,000 people. So their previous PPC manager was kind of light on implementation, and it took forever for them to actually get changes made to their campaigns. It wasn't moving the needle, and the practice really wasn't happy with their pricing structure either. This particular PPC manager charged a percentage of ad spend, which a lot of managers in the industry do. So this had the effect of the practice being penalized, in essence, for spending more money on ads. The more they spent, the more that they were charged as a management fee as well. So we took over management of their PPC campaigns, and thanks to our efforts, they've seen a 49% increase in website traffic and 154% increase in new monthly patient leads. And to take just a recent 3-week period as an example, they had one campaign that they spent $1,600 on in the course of 3 weeks. That yielded 25 leads, and with their conversion numbers, they turned that $1,600 into a $58,000 profit, which was an ROI of nearly 3,500%, actually more than that. So PPC can be incredibly beneficial to your practice in getting new patient leads as long as it's done right. So to recap what we've talked about today, your brand is the sum of all touch points that patients have with your organization. And when you're thinking about your brand, leave no stone unturned. Consider every single aspect of your brand and of the experience that patients could have. Your website is the starting point for all patient interactions. So you need to focus on the fundamentals and providing the best online experience possible. SEO represents the best long-term competitive strategy to build an enduring healthcare brand. It takes time, but it's well worth the investment in the long run. PPC, on the other hand, is the best opportunity for immediate patient leads. And yes, it does require continual ad spend, but it can be instantly ROI positive, and it's very data-driven. If you want to grow your practice, you need to strike the right balance between all of these different channels. Take an excellent website and back it up with the right strategic investments in SEO for that long-term competitive advantage, paired with PPC campaigns for immediate patient leads. Over time, you can reinvest those profits into advertising and patient acquisition efforts to get that practice flywheel spinning faster and faster. And if you need some help, we're more than happy to discuss any of our offerings with you. We specialize in these 3 things for healthcare organizations. So whether you might want to switch from your current marketing provider, or if you're just starting a campaign from scratch, we want to help you see you grow. And we do have flexible work structures as well. So we work with existing practices, brand new practices, and also alongside other marketing consultants. So for smaller practices, oftentimes we function as a fully outsourced marketing team. For practices with in-house marketing teams, we partner with them to outsource certain channels while their in-house team focuses on others. And if you have a larger marketing team that might need guidance or insights, we also provide marketing consulting to help those teams get a fresh perspective on how their campaigns are going. I also want to highlight a few offers for attendees of this webinar today. If you have a website, but you're not sure how you rank, we offer a free SEO audit of your existing website to give you a roadmap on where to go next to achieve those higher rankings. And if you happen to be running any PPC campaigns already, we have a free Google Ads audit that can help you identify room for improvement and give you, again, a roadmap to boost that ROI. regardless of where you find yourself, I'd love to connect with you and see how our team can help you grow your practice. So you can contact me via email or on Twitter. You can check out our website at messenger.md. We've got tons of practice marketing resources on the site. And if you enjoyed the webinar today, you can also search for the Medical Marketing Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you like to listen. We try to put out a new episode every week that helps practices improve their marketing, grow revenue, and take that patient experience to the next level. So with that, I will hand it back over to Marianne for some Q&A time.
Thank you, Crawford, for the comprehensive presentation. We are now going to answer a few questions that have been sent by our audience. All right, so the very first question is, what budget should we put away for marketing at the start? Crawford, would you like to take this question, please?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's hard to answer that one off the top of my head because every practice is so unique. Different specialties have different revenue that they make on procedures or patient visits or whatnot. And it does depend on what type of marketing mix you want to have. So if you're going to invest in something like PPC campaigns, I would recommend a minimum of $1,000 a month, again, depending on your market and the size and the competition. SEO, again, as I said, often ends up being at least $1,000 a month to optimize your website and help you climb up higher in those rankings. We see many of practices that we work with, their overall marketing budget is anywhere from $3,000 at the low end. Some are spending upwards of $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 at the high end if they have a larger practice or maybe a multi-location practice in more competitive markets. So it really does depend. But if you start off small with a new practice and make those investments strategically, and then really focus on reinvesting revenue back into marketing, as I said in my presentation, that gets the flywheel spinning and it just makes those results a lot easier to achieve over time.
All right, thank you for answering that question. So the next question we have is from Dr. White. He says, what impact will COVID-19 have on opening up a practice? Marianne, would you like to answer this question, please?
Yes, that's a good question, Dr. White. A few things that we are sure of at this point in time. Definitely nothing is set in gold considering the circumstances. The first and foremost thing that you need to think about is you need to think about redefining the treatment options that you're going to provide to your patients. A lot of patients are not going to come to your practices, so having a telemedicine option available for them is going to be extremely important. We need to understand that a lot of payers, including Medicare and Medicaid, are supporting providing telehealth. So if you're opening up a practice, do think about deploying telemedicine technology from the get-go and developing patient material that will educate them on how to use it to their best advantage. The second thing that you should be prepared for is a lot of people have lost their jobs, which means that a lot of people are going to be losing their insurance coverage. So you need to be prepared to handle a situation where there will be delayed payments, patients' self-responsibility or self-payments are going to rise in comparison to what you get from insurances. So you need to make sure that your billing department is ready to deal with these kind of inflows. Apart from that, if you are in circumstances that you think that going at it alone is not the best thing for you, you might want to look at some employment and merger opportunities that are out there with hospitals or other practices. There are a lot of investment equity firms that are also looking to buy medical practices. The issue with that will be that the valuation post-pandemic is not going to be as high as it was before. So that is one thing that you might want to consider. You might want to also consider staffing models. There are different things that your staff usually does when they're coming to the office and when they're performing at their best. The problem is that a lot of your staff might not be able to come. A lot of your staff may have to be furloughed. So thinking of how technology can help you in those circumstances would be something would be a good consideration to make. For example, if you're thinking about setting up a billing department, hiring a full-time biller, or getting a team to come in and then training them, it might be worth your while to find a billing company who can deal with it in the beginning rather than hiring staff to do it for you. We've already shared, one of the companies that is providing it at 3%. So you might want to get in touch with them. Or if there's an EMR technology company that you're dealing with, you might want to enter into a medical billing contract with them where you can get the EMR and the practice management for free. I think that's about it. Over to you, Kate.
All right, thank you so much, Marianne. So we only have time to take one more question, and this is from Richard. He says, if I did not have a lot of money to dedicate to the marketing of the practice, what are the essential steps that I should still invest in? Crawford, this one is for you.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Aside from the must-have of having a website to which to send your patients, if you have a limited budget and you need patients quickly, especially if you're a new practice, I would recommend investing in pay-per-click advertising campaigns first, primarily because they are so data-driven. You can run quick experiments and reach a lot of people fairly cheaply. It does depend, again, on your market and your particular specialty. Those factors will influence how many patient leads you could get from that. But if you have a limited budget and you need patients quickly, I would recommend engaging in PPC campaigns because you match that search intent. For instance, somebody is looking for a LASIK surgeon or a plastic surgeon near them. You match that search intent with an ad that meets that patient exactly where they are, and they say, whoa, that's perfect, that's exactly what I'm looking for. They land on your website and they take that next step. So for immediate leads with a limited budget, I would definitely recommend pay-per-click campaigns as a first starting place.
All right, thank you so much, Crawford. I think this is about the time we have for today. We have received a lot of questions that we will try to answer over the next few days, or perhaps in a follow-up webinar. Now, these details that you see on your screen, if you would like to get in touch with our EMR consultant, you can either give them a call or you could book an appointment online. It's a free consultation. And thank you so much to our speakers as well as the audience for taking out the time. I hope you found the webinar helpful. Have a good week ahead. Stay safe. Thank you so much.